Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
We turn our attention imminently to Theresa May's speech about housing that is underway, and which, you'll forgive me for suggesting, it just sort of retreads an awful lot of territory that we've examined on this programme many, many times, and recycles a fundamental policy platform that Ed Miliband proposed. You remember use it or lose it? In fact, you know, the more I think about it, the more I wonder whether Ed Miliband deserves a royalty every time Theresa May unveils a new policy. You think about the energy price caps, which the Daily Mail had a fit of the vapours about. Yeah, they're kind of doing something like that. And now they're telling developers that if they own land and don't build on it, then they'll face penalties, including possibly the refusal or even the withdrawal of planning permission, which sounds very much like use it or lose it. You still think I exaggerate this stuff, don't you? Well, why would the right-wing press like something when Theresa May did it and not like it when Ed Miliband did it? Could it possibly be because they're worried about the other stuff that a Labour government might have done, like have a Leveson 2 inquiry? But they're not going to do it under the Conservatives, so they'll cheer the same policies from different politicians, which have absolutely nothing to do with the policies. That's a bit of a penny drop moment, isn't it? Why would a newspaper have completely different attitudes to the same policies, depending upon who is pronouncing the policies? You can make a case for competence or a broader belief in ability or a broader belief in ideology, but ultimately, if you've got two people, one of whom is going to carry on with a pledge to properly investigate links between the media and the police, and one of whom is not, you're going to cheer the policy when the one who's going to let you off the hook announces it, and condemn it when the one who's going to keep you on the hook announces exactly the same thing first. So Miliband was first with the price cap, first with use it or lose it. Theresa May announces them. I think she should be held accountable. I think she should have to give a royalty to Miliband for this. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. I want to try and do it for the reasons that I've just highlighted, actually unintentionally. I want to try and do it in a non-party political way and actually in an ideological way, because now that they've both announced it, I'd have to hold you in the lowest of regard, wouldn't I? I'd have to think you were truly stupid to think that there's a debate to have about parties here, because they're both doing it. I don't know what the message from central office is today. You're supposed to blame it on, I don't know, councils, are you? Are you supposed to blame it on councils, or are you supposed to blame it on someone else? The bottom line here is that private companies own huge swathes of land that they don't need to build on to boost their bottom line, because property values in this country have been so vastly and madly inflated over the last few years. A company like Persimmon can share a bonus pool of £500 million between 140 staff while not building as many houses as we think they should. There's a line in Theresa May's speech about bonuses that appears unintentionally to undermine the entire point of the free market. I'll get it for you. I'll get it absolutely right for you, because it's possible that I've misunderstood this. I think it was a Financial Times journalist who pointed it out. If she is, as she was due to do, currently arguing that bonuses paid out to bosses of property companies should not be linked to the amount of money they make, but be linked to the amount of houses they build, she is arguably completely undermining, I think she is completely undermining the fundamental principles of the free market. She's effectively saying you're not free to do whatever you want. You have to do what we want, and you will be punished or rewarded accordingly. Here you go, here it is. This is what she's due to say. The bonuses paid to the heads of some of our biggest developers are based not on the number of homes they build, but on their profits or share price. That creates a perverse incentive. So when Ed Miliband did it, he couldn't be accused of hypocrisy, because he didn't think that the free market was something before which we should all assume the position. He believed, this is the notion of excessive capitalism or crony capitalism, he believed there's nothing wrong with making money, but you should have limits upon how much or how that money is made. Corbyn is, I think, much more to the left of that position, although possibly not quite as far to the left of it as some of his critics contend. This is the opposite. This is literally how free markets work. The bonuses paid to the heads of some of our biggest developers are based not on the number of homes they build, but on their profits or share price. That creates a perverse incentive. In other words, if I was making pies, right, and my thanks to Jim Pickard of the Financial Times, the chief political correspondent, for drawing my attention to this line of thought. The bonuses paid to the... You should follow him on Twitter. I'm nicking all this off him. The bonuses paid to the heads of some of our biggest pie makers are based not on the number of pies they make, but on their profits or share price. That creates a perverse incentive. If I haven't turned you on yet to this story, stay with me, because it's really important. The whole basis of the economic system that the government ostensibly endorses, some would say slavishly, is the maximisation of profit. So here I have a crate of pies. Theresa May essentially argues today that I shouldn't sell them for as much as I humanly can. I should be motivated by a desire to spread the pies out. So even if you came along and said, I'll give you 100 quid for each pie, and I've got 10 pies, so that's a grand in the hole, I'll give you 100 quid for each pie, Theresa May would come along and say, either, no, you must sell one pie to each customer for less than £100, or she would say, you've got to make more pies and sell them for less. To which I, as a businessman, respond, I think, and we're blending ideology and politics here, but it's fascinating to see what pops out of the bottom. I think the Prime Minister is telling private sector businesses today to stop trying to make as much money as possible, which I welcome. I mean, politically, ideologically, socially, as a parent, I think that the property market and the relationship between house building and the economy is utterly broken, completely toxic. We've examined it countless times on this programme. But we can't let a Conservative Prime Minister pretend that she's not actually endorsing an anti-conservative policy, can we? Or a profoundly unconservative policy. As I understand it, neoliberalism, free market economics, call it what you will, hinges almost entirely upon the idea that if you let businesses make as much money as possible, we somehow all benefit. This is the thinking behind so-called trickle-down economics. And I know what you're thinking. When's it going to trickle down to me? And the answer, in my view, is never, because this is the con that they sell us. You let me make £1 billion, boss, and I promise you all the plebs will get a slice of it. Eventually it'll all filter down, but it doesn't. How do I see a piece of the action if you've gone out and bought a yacht? For example, well, people have to make the yacht and people have to upholster the yacht and then you have to crew the yacht. Yeah, but if they're on minimum wage and 0-hour contracts and keeping more and more of the profits than ever before, how does that constitute trickle-down economics? Oh, don't worry your pretty little head with details like that. Vote Conservative, vote often. And then, of course, as we're seeing in Italy at the moment, if you vote right-wing historically and your life doesn't get better, it's very hard not to conclude that we haven't been right-wing enough. Let's be more right-wing, and then my life might improve. You're living in rural poverty in southern Italy, then bringing in a new wave of Mussolinis is somehow going to improve your life by weaponising anti-immigration sentiment. It won't improve your life, but I can see why you might think it would. So right-wing policies brought in fail, and then either you double down on the right-wing policies, which is how, you know, Holocausts happen, or you reverse ferret and actually turn to a left-wing policy. I think this is a left-wing policy. And this is a programme where increasingly we don't know what the difference is between right-wing and left-wing anymore. All it really seems to refer to is so-called identity politics. This is a left-wing policy. If she's telling businesses not to prioritise making money, then she is essentially moving slightly to the left of Jeremy Corbyn. But unless... look, it's possible, I know I say this often, it's because I'm so modest. I may have got this wrong, right? But if I've got it right, I don't think anybody in the newspaper world will explain it to you like this. They can't, can they? They're handcuffed to their own toxic ideology. This is an exhortation to private business to stop trying to make as much money as possible, whereas the whole neoliberal project and the whole point of government since 2010 has been to encourage and free up business to profiteer and pursue money as enthusiastically or as violently as possible. Isn't it? So that's your starter for 10. 0345 6060 973. Is she, as I understand it, telling companies to stop trying to make as much money as possible? For the record, I hope she is, because I think it's a good message. I just think it's one that might get slightly corrupted when it's passed through the lens of the right-wing media. And then you move to number 2. Do you think it's a good idea? So should we actually be treating property, as I've often argued with you, certain things on the list should be separate from the free market? The most fundamental requirement of inhabitation, of existence, arguably, is shelter, food and shelter. Should it be removed from the roundabout of free market economics? Should governments be intervening more? It was Margaret Thatcher that prevented councils from borrowing money to build. Something which arguably is the root, the biggest and the ugliest root of the current housing crisis. The fact that councils for generations have been legally prevented from borrowing money to build homes. Again, this is all stuff I've learnt from you, so if I'm misremembering it or misrepresenting it, you know what to do. That's why they're not building houses. Because if you're private sector and you've got a choice between not building something for 10 years and turning a £1 million profit, or building it tomorrow and turning a 10 grand profit, you're going to sit on it for 10 years and coin in £1 million a decade down the line. If you're a council where you have a responsibility to your residents, you're going to build homes according to need. Yeah, we're onto something here. Write this down. If you're a council or a government, you should be building homes according to need, right? If you're a business, you don't care. In fact, the more need there is, the more money you make. So you are almost commercially obliged to build as little as possible. Is this right? If it is, they should get me on the stage at the Labour conference. If you are commercially obliged to build as little as possible so that the demand rockets because supply shrinks, ban councils from borrowing money to build houses, sell off the housing stock at a discount to people who live in council housing without replacing it like for like, or even, as I would suggest, building 2 new properties for every one that you sell off, then this situation not only becomes likely, it's absolutely inevitable. So what you have here is 1980s, 40 years of neoliberal economic policy undertaken by the Conservative Party and Tony Blair's Labour Party that renders it inevitable that businesses don't build houses. So when Theresa May turns around today and tells them that they have to, how the hell are we supposed to respond? I do not know, but I know the time and I know the number, and that's how you get involved. It's 11:16, and you dial 0345 6060 973. And just a little mention to everybody who's sending me photographs of myself and some of my colleagues on these billboards that have sprung up around the country. Be very careful, seriously. We went round the Chiswick round about 8 times last night trying to get the right angle, and a Ferrari's face kept popping up every time we were in an optimum position. But I was in the passenger seat. A couple of the ones I've been sent look suspiciously as if they might have been taken from the driving seat, which I actively and genuinely discourage you from doing. It's never... In fact, if it looks like it's been taken from the driving seat, I'm not going to give you a shout-out, as the kids say, on the radio. I am, however, going to give a shout-out to Bob Cairns, who's in Norfolk, because this made me chuckle. He goes, I know how you feel about Bradley Wiggins. My wife says I agree with everything James O'Brien says just because James O'Brien said it. Bob Cairns in Norfolk. There's a pint of Woodford's Wherry for you in the pipes, Bob, next time you're passing. Now, on housing, I sometimes when I have what I like to call on the programme a penny drop or a light bulb moment, I recognise that for some people listening it must be quite frustrating, because you'll be going, duh, how long did that take? But it's because Theresa May has essentially tried today to pass off Ed Miliband's policy as her own, when the right-wing media and the Conservative Party were queuing up to castigate Ed Miliband for suggesting precisely the same thing. So then you start to think, what's changed? How can this be? So obviously Downing Street, and do you know, I was thinking the other day, when you talk about biased media, do you know the former editor of the Andrew Marr programme and the former political editor of the Daily Mail now work at Downing Street? You don't hire people like that unless you think that they can make a few calls, pull in a few favours from within the industry. So if you wonder why newspaper editorials or even the occasional speech radio angle on some of these stories seems slightly at odds with reality, that's why. You don't hire the former political editor of the Daily Mail or the former editor of the Andrew Marr programme to work for you at Downing Street unless you think they can use their contacts book to pull a few strings and call in a few favours. So you look at a story like this and you wonder why it's not being pointed out. Two things missing from coverage of this story. First is that Sajid Javid, who sadly we're not going to be able to interview on this programme, surrendered £292 million that he had at his disposal and had been allocated for desperately needed affordable homes over the course of the last 2 years, and he gave it back to the Treasury. This for 2 years running. 72 million back to the Treasury, which are allocated for affordable housing this year. 220 million that he was given. It was in his budget for building affordable homes the previous year, and it's gone back to the Treasury. Couldn't spend it. Who's he going to blame today? Nah. The developers. Who did the developers blame? The councils. Who did the councils blame? Well, the government. Councils aren't allowed to borrow money to build. So, Theresa May, I'm sorry to go on about this. Sometimes when I think I've finally understood something for the very first time, I tend to get a bit carried away. Theresa May today is telling private businesses to not prioritise profit, i.e. to actually build and sell more houses for less money. She is breaking the rule of neoliberalism or free market economics, the most fundamental rule. This should be the biggest story in town by a country mile. But we're in such a mess now as a country, it'll be reported in a completely anodyne, watered-down, vanilla way. She's launching an assault upon free market economics. Here it was in the Mail when Ed Miliband did it. I kid you not, okay? Headline, word for word. Miliband the land grabber read Ed's threat to confiscate unused land branded Stalinist as backlash grows over his plans to control property market. That's how stupid these people think that we are. Ed Miliband does it. It's Stalinist. Theresa May does exactly the same thing. Former editor of the Andrew Marr programme, former political editor of the Daily Mail, get on the phone, say, can you write it up this way? Give it a spin on that. Daily Telegraph say, well, she can write the article herself if she wants. That's in the Daily Telegraph today. Everybody else says, yeah, right, you are. Yeah, nice one. When's the next cocktail party? It's exactly the same policy. It's Stalinist when he does it. It's a brave new dawn when she does it. I'm going to shut up now and take some calls. Kieran's in Milton Keynes. Kieran, calm me down.
Hi, James. Pleasure to speak to you, mate. I thought you'd find something interesting just because, you know, you're a clever bloke. Do you know that the way the money in circulation, so all of what we can spend as money, is actually issued via debt? It's not actually backed up by anything. There's no... You're
sounding a bit YouTube-y. Can we talk specifically about Theresa May's housing policy and the comparison with Ed Miliband's? Do you mind?
No, well, yeah, I said to your researcher that the reason why house prices are mandated to go up is precisely because of this history of how money is implemented into the economy. But
that's true in all economies, and our prices have been inflated massively compared to other economies that are running exactly the same way. So politically, something's gone on in Britain.
What do you mean politically something's gone on?
Well, there's a reason why the inflation in house prices has been so profound in this country, and in America actually, but in continental Europe it has not kept up anything like the same pace, despite operating on the same fundamental economic and banking principles.
Well, but isn't that the link between the issue of debt? If most of our debt issue is via mortgages, then if those prices sink because we're so dependent on those high mortgages, debt issue, which is...
And the phone line's gone, and so unfortunately did my line of reasoning. I would try and get you back up, but I mean it when I say I want to keep this fairly straightforward. And also, house prices have started going down now in certain parts of the country, and theoretically that's a good thing, even when it's your own house, because it increases the chances of your kids being able to afford somewhere. I've got some phone lines free, 0345 6060 973. Am I right when I say to you that what Theresa May is criticising today is the most fundamental platform of the sort of free market economics that her party exists to promote? Luke's in Bishop Stortford. Luke, what's going on?
Good morning, James. How are you?
Very well. I'm feeling quite clever, actually. I think I finally understood stuff.
Well, housing is my passion, and I work massively in social housing.
Go on.
And I think one of the... you'll know, you're a Londoner. I think one of the biggest changes we're seeing is the globalisation of the world, and certainly of cities like London.
Yeah.
So if you take away the basic council housing stock, we have many councils like Southwark Council, Lambeth Council, now setting up their own development companies, basically socially cleansing their council estates and then selling off privately. And I am honestly, I've worked in housing for like 25 years, and it's massively my passion. I'm kind of devastated at what we're doing to our city, because we used to have people living side by side, and we are just creating a super rich city for the rich, and we are beyond socially cleansing London and other cities across the UK, which is one of the biggest problems.
I used to think that this was exaggerated, and I've had a crash course since the Grenfell Tower tragedy in what social cleansing means. And I remember sitting with a gentleman who worked tirelessly and continues to do so with the survivors of that tragedy. He works within one of the social clubs in the shadow of the organiser of the tower, and he was telling me about the compulsory purchase parameters for him. He'd never lived anywhere else, in fact. Him and his parents had bought their former council home, and he'd bought a flat in the same development of someone else who'd bought their former council home. So they had two flats in the same block, and they were offered, I forget precisely what the numbers were, but they walked away with, say, £550,000 each compulsory purchase for their flats, and to buy a property in the new development that was being put up in place of their old homes. In his case, the only building he had ever lived in his 50-odd years on this earth, and the entry level was about 850 grand. So unless he won the lottery to the tune of £300,000, it doesn't sound like social cleansing when someone's walking away with a £550,000 cheque until you geographise it and put it in the context of, will he be able to live in the only community he's ever known anymore? No. That's what you mean, isn't it?
Absolutely. You've heard of our film before. I think you mentioned it before, Dispossession.
Oh, I didn't know that was you. You and it's Paul, is it? You and Paul who made that?
Yeah, Paul and I made it.
Yes.
He's the director, I'm the executive producer. In simple terms, I'm a council flat kid. I was born under Barnet Council, and I never thought I would live in my city, where, as you just said, if you look at a quick example of the Haygate estate, Zone 1, which was the first estate which kind of Southwark Council got away with, because they wouldn't take residents' meetings, they wouldn't deal with more than one resident at a time. And I've had people in tears stand in front of me say that they took £75,000 as compulsory purchase when they should have been getting 300,000 or 400,000, because they were worried, and this lady's words.
And they didn't know. Sorry, I'm yes.
She was worried they were going to knock the block down with her in it. That's how scared some of the people
and
are.
They arrive and they knock on the doors in their shiny suits, and they make these cases, and they pull out their brochures, and then they actually pick the pockets of people that politicians should be working hardest to protect. I recommend your film, Dispossession. It's on Netflix now, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, well done. Also, have a look at Icarus, which won the Oscars documentary last night, and it ties in with the conversation we were having in the last hour about cycling and Russian doping. It's an amazing film, so there's two recommendations for you today. Finally, Luke, this thing from Theresa May about the idea of bosses of property companies having to operate according to the number of houses they sell rather than the amount of money that they make.
You know what the problem is? I think what she's trying to do, she knows, I think, that the greed in housing, because let's face it, the UK economy is pretty much run on our housing market.
Yes.
She knows that the greed has gone too far, and there's a big fight back from the people like the Haringey gamble in Haringey. You've got the Aylesbury estate people fighting.
They never get coverage. I mean, I'll do my best, but you need to be in the newspapers, and the newspapers aren't going to be in this, because the fellas that own the newspapers will have massive stakes in these sort of property companies, or indeed in the investment funds that have invested in the property companies.
Absolutely, and I can say categorically the amount of corruption between local councils and private developers. But I think she's really scared now, because the greed has gone too far. She knows that people power. There's a very big change politically, as you know, in this country, with people actually not just accepting what politicians say. And I think she's trying to backtrack. But, I won't go into great detail on air, but the amount of dodgy deals that go on between local councillors and developers. And this is what happens when a government of a country and local councils give their social housing stock over with these silly viability studies to private developers.
With the belief that the private, and that's what today is so interesting for, is this notion that the private developers are somehow going to act in an altruistic or in a social way. They're going to act for the greater good, almost utilitarianism, when in the case of Persimmon, they're sharing a 500 million quid bonus pool between 140 staff. And Theresa May is saying them today. Do you think you could possibly, wind your necks in a bit, make a bit less money, build more houses? The outcry that saw them reduce that bonus pool by £25 million didn't come from Luke or me or you, came from investors. It's 11:32. And you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where the apparent confusion of Theresa May about why we're not building more houses is something that we can address directly. The reason why we're not building more houses is that these companies make more money not building them. And then when they do build them, they want to build the most expensive and profitable buildings they can build, which is why private sector housing and public sector housing probably, and I'm a bit of a, I wouldn't say an ignoramus, but this is not what I'd ever chalk up as a specialist subject for me on Mastermind, but this seems to me to be a very powerful argument about why public sector housing and private sector housing should never have been conflated in the way that they were by right to buy legislation. There may have been a way to do it that didn't lead inevitably and inexorably to where we are now, but I can't see what it is. And I'll tell you something else for nothing. This is not about a shortage of social housing, this announcement by Theresa May. This is about the realisation that Conservative voters are realising that their children aren't going to be able to afford to buy houses. And if we want to break it down on party political lines, that was never supposed to happen. I don't care if there's a shortage of council housing. I don't care if people are sleeping in doorways in sub-zero temperatures. My kids can't afford to get on the housing ladder. And I know this because of my kind of socio-economic status. You're looking at people who possibly, if they're in the southeast, live in homes that on paper are worth over £1 million. But if they've got 2 or more children, they can't quite see how their kids are going to get on the ladder anywhere close to where they grew up. So Theresa May suddenly now that this problem has reached into, I'd say, the top 20% of the country socio-economically, it's been the case at the lower orders for generations, but now it's getting higher and higher and higher. That's why she's suddenly realised we've got to take action. I can't ask. Capitalism, okay, doesn't really work in a society where nobody's got any capital. And as I've been telling you since 2010, this entire political project is about seeing more and more capital accrued by fewer and fewer people. So this had to happen. It has to happen like this. But of course, the idea of selling capitalism to a generation of educated middle-class professionals who may once have very easily voted Conservative, when they haven't got any capital of their own, and when social capital like health, education and similar is being eroded daily. That's the big crisis. Once people, however it happens, whether we bring in really stringent immigration rules or not, once people realise that their lives are not being diminished by immigration, as the right-wing newspapers with massive investments in property companies and the like want you to believe, this is what's happened. All the money is being concentrated into a smaller and smaller pot. Theresa May, fighting an election in the next 3 or 4 years, knows that traditional Conservative voters are looking at their own children and thinking, well, they're not supposed to spend their lives renting. That's my view. Paul's in Southampton, hopefully with a different one. Paul, what would you like to say?
Hi there, yeah, I'm really sort of frustrated by Theresa May.
You're going to have to do, I'm frustrated by your phone line, Paul. You're going to have to do something with it. I'll come back to you imminently, I promise. David is in Wakefield in West Yorkshire. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I just don't understand why we talk about the idea of a crisis, housing crisis, and then in the same breath we use the term building houses. Surely, you know, we need to shift the mindset in terms of this medieval process of actually putting one brick on top of the other. If they wanted to, the government could solve this very easily, and that would be by erecting houses. We've got the modern technology, we've got the computer-aided design to mass-produce these things as individually as people want them.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here's the land, right? And I take your word for it on this. Do you have a commercial interest in this yourself?
No, but it's something I've studied, and I just
no, okay, I'm just checking. So we could easily throw up, for want of a better word, perfectly habitable buildings at a rate of knots. We've seen it happen in other countries, but it has to be on land that someone currently owns, mate. And if your profit on doing what you've just described is going to be a fraction of what it would be if we carry on as we are, even if carrying on as we are involves me sitting on that field for 10 years, do you see why the logjam has occurred, or have I misunderstood you?
Well, I don't think it's so much the land that is the issue. There is a problem why the government don't want to do it, and that is you would not need the amount of people involved in supplying mortgages. You don't need the people in terms of bricklayers, electricians, because these things...
Yeah, but they know this. These guys know... If this was... And you could be right. You could have kind of unpicked the property market in a way that the people running the property companies haven't noticed. But they know all this, and they're looking at how can we make the most money. And I don't think what you're suggesting is the answer to that question, is it? Which is why they haven't done it.
It would solve the crisis, but it might not make people, in terms of the system we've got at the moment, it wouldn't fulfil people's aim of maximising profit.
And
if we talked about a crisis and a housing crisis, that's the only way to solve it, realistically, I think.
Well, not necessarily. You could build, but forgive me, proper houses. You could build houses that aren't prefabricated or aren't pre-constructed.
James, I never use the word prefabricated. I think that's where we've got a danger, looking at things that could be pre-war, perhaps, or the connotations of something looking.
No, but that is what you mean. That's why I think you've got. I think, despite you telling me that you haven't, I think you've got a few quid invested in this, mate.
No, I've not.
David.
The only few quid I've got involved that could damage me is I'm on the housing ladder myself, and I just think that if we start a process by solving the amount of houses that we need, then the real impact is on people who are on the capital ladder at the moment. I don't think the government wants that either, do they?
And well, that depends how exposed you are. Pardon my French, but if you're running the risk of moving into negative equity, it's a much harder pill to swallow than it is losing a few quid off your notional idea of how clear you'll be when you finally pay off your mortgage, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think.
Sure.
No, I'm with you. There must be lots and lots of ways. That's why the word housing crisis, it conveniently ignores how many properties are... Stop talking over me when I'm talking over you, David. Honestly, learn some manners. It conveniently ignores all sorts of things, not least the number of houses that are owned by foreign offshore trusts that just sit empty, going up every year, ticking up like a mileometer.
Yeah, not in Wakefield, maybe, James, but in London, yeah. I think it's a countrywide issue.
Maybe not in Wakefield, although, I don't know, I'd quite... The West Yorkshire Sculpture Park, if you could get me a nice place with a view over that, I'd pay well over the odds.
Yeah.
11:44 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, seriously, I appreciate Theresa May, as far as I can tell from this speech, isn't actually suggesting that land would be compulsorily purchased. That is something that only happens to... ordinary Joes like you and me. They want to build HS2 through where your house currently stands, or the council in cahoots with a private development company wants to build a lovely luxurious block where your block currently is, then they can compulsorily purchase our homes, whoever you are, actually. But Theresa May isn't suggesting that we would do that to developers like Ed Miliband did. I think Ed Miliband essentially argued confiscation. Jeremy Corbyn has as well, with financial compensation, but you can't. If you've got planning permission and you haven't built on it for X months or years, you lose the... You don't just lose the planning permission, you lose the property. We'll pay you back what you paid for it or something like that. And when Ed Miliband suggests that, I've got the actual front page of the Mail now. He is a Stalinist, an actual Stalinist. When Theresa May suggests today that companies behaving in precisely this form or fashion deserve a slap, I wonder if anyone will call her a Stalinist in tomorrow's newspapers, or any of the people trying to pass Sajid Javid's nonsense off today as anything other than an arse-covering exercise will have the nous to describe him as a Stalinist as well. What do you think? They've had a little vote on Cornish pasties. You can still call them that for the time being. Yeah, after Brexit, anyone can call their pasty Cornish. You could make them in Korea, make them anywhere you want. They could sell them wherever they want. That's one of the things that we're going to lose. In fact, speaking of things we're going to lose, Robin's been in touch with a tweet. He says, your job requires reliance on telephone communication. How many calls do you have to interrupt due to bad connections? Now magnify this by 1,000 with respect to the electronic solution to the Northern Ireland border issue to realise that there is no mature technology fit for the purpose. God, people who bring everything back to Brexit really get on my nerves. Honestly, you lost, mate. Get over it. By the way, that clip of me comparing Roger Bannister's 4-minute mile to Brexit has just been uploaded on the internet, so if you want to go and have a look at that, you can. But an American newcomer has taken a first prize at the World Pasty Championships after using a radical ingredient. If you already know the answer to this, you're not allowed to play. If you don't know the answer to this, what do you think it is? An American newcomer at the World Pasty Championships has landed a first prize after introducing what to a pasty? Theo Osherwood?
No idea.
Can I have a guess?
Cinnamon?
I like the way your mind works, but you're completely wrong. Why are you here?
I'm here to talk about, it says at the top of my sheet, housing, but actually I think it relates more to capital, at least the politics does.
I thought so. You obviously haven't been listening to us, you've been listening to Theresa May, but that's the conclusion we just arrived at.
Yes, this is about, Theresa May's housing speech is actually about capital, because the Conservative brand relies on people being able to buy in to the capitalist society.
Yes.
And if most people under the age of 40 can't buy into that, then how can they take part? Why are they going to vote for it?
Yeah.
And that's why Theresa May has identified this.
So it's got nothing to do with social housing or affordable housing or people who would never have expected to land on the ladder. This is all about the children of lifelong Conservative voters who've suddenly realised in their 20s, 30s and possibly even 40s
47 is the age that some within Labour say if you're under 47, then you're locked.
46, I'm right on the line, and I genuinely believe that if the cards had fallen ever so slightly... Do you know, if I hadn't met Mrs O'Brien, sorry to anecdotalise this very important political conversation, I would not have got my, God, it was close, stuff together to buy a house. There was no way she was going to marry me unless I could offer up some form of security. So I bought a flat years before I would have done if I'd stayed single, and if I'd stayed single, by the time I decided it was time to buy a flat, I'd have been out of the game.
I was in a very, very similar situation with my wife.
Aren't we lucky, eh?
We're very, very lucky.
Poor them.
But the point is that, from the Conservative point of view, they cannot try and sell something to people if people can't buy it. And that's something that Theresa May outlined at the beginning of her speech today.
Talking to voters during last year's election campaign, it was clear that many people, particularly younger people, are angry about this. Angry that regardless of how hard they work, they won't be able to buy a place of their own. Angry when they're forced to hand more and more of their wages to a landlord to whom their home is simply a business asset. Angry that no matter how many sacrifices they make to save for a deposit, they'll never be able to compete with someone whose parents have released equity from their own home to help their children buy.
This is weird, because she's right, and yet half of me is going, yes, like it did when Ed Miliband made similar noises, and the other half of me is going, oh, Diddums, is it hurting you now?
Problem solved. Well, problem identified, tick. Then, of course, you mentioned Ed Miliband, and I did hear...
Stalinist. Red Ed Miliband, the Stalinist, who wrote this policy.
Who wrote this policy that's been nicked. The central plank to this policy is the idea that if you're a property developer, you're buying up some land, you're speculating on that land, the property value is going to go up, the value of the land is going to go up, and then you're going to sell flats or whatever as a large value, large price afterwards. And the point is that she's saying to councils, well, as part of our new framework, there could be this idea that if they don't build on land previously, you could withhold granting planning permission in future for future houses.
The bonuses paid to the heads of some of our biggest developers are based not on the number of homes they build, but on their profits or share price. In a market where lower supply equals higher prices, that creates a perverse incentive, one that does not encourage them to build the homes we need. Oliver Letwin is currently reviewing the causes of the planning permission gap. If he finds evidence of unjustifiable delay, I will not rule out any options for ending such practices. That may include allowing councils to take a developer's previous rate of build-out into account when deciding whether to grant planning permission. I want to see planning permissions going to people who are actually going to build houses, not just sit on land and watch its value rise.
Do you know what I love about question and answer sessions with these speeches? Sometimes a journalist who really knows their onions on a particular subject is pointed to and is allowed to ask questions. Not somebody from the political lobby, but somebody who really knows.
Will Hurst from the Architecture Journal doing the Garden Bridge stuff.
Exactly. And then Theresa May points to the bloke from the Planning Times, I think it was, and he asked a question. It's a very simple question. Forget the rhetoric. Yeah. What are you actually going to do about it?
Policy.
But as I say, this is what I'm encouraging people to do, is to see this as a great national effort, if you like, all of us coming together, playing our role in making sure that we do deliver those homes. We're writing the planning rule book to encourage that to happen. As I also said in my speech, I look to builders, to developers, to come forward, to play their part in ensuring that we get those permissions built out and we get those homes built for people.
I'm going to play that again, Theo, because I misheard. I think she just sort of said she was going to encourage people to do stuff that they're not currently doing because they make more money doing what they're not currently doing than they would doing the stuff that she's encouraging them to do. But I must have misheard. Let's just hear that again in terms of substantive policy announcements that will address the problem she's identified.
But as I say, this is what I'm encouraging people to do, is to see this as a great national effort, if you like, all of us coming together, playing our role in making sure that we do deliver those homes. We're writing the planning rule book to encourage that to happen. As I also said in my speech, I look to builders, to developers, to come forward, to play their part in ensuring that we get those permissions built out and we get those homes built for people.
So I believe the phrase is sweet FA.
The problem for Theresa May with this particular issue is she becomes a commentator. That they've identified this serious problem that they need to solve. and then it comes down to actually doing something about it. But because Theresa May doesn't have an overall parliamentary majority, she doesn't have, she can't risk upsetting many of her backbenchers because of, dare I say it, Brexit. She can't take those risks, therefore she can't be bold and say, do something really radical, which is like build on the green belt, which of course goes back to policy guidelines that were drawn up in the 1950s. Many of her own side actually would like her to, but of course those Tory MPs in the Shires don't want to, and many of them are Eurosceptic. Can't do anything actually concrete. We end up with the Prime Minister talking about doing things in the national effort and speaking at the planning conference in central London. It doesn't actually it doesn't come up with much.
No, and part of the reason is this rather beautiful juxtaposition of front pages. When Ed Miliband identified this problem and did put forward concrete ways of tackling it, he was described thus: Miliband, the land grabber, read Ed's threat to confiscate unused land, branded Stalinist, as backlash grows over his plans to control property market. It would have been good if they had the same names on the byline, wouldn't it? But they don't, sadly. They're probably all working at Downing Street now, given that that was written in 2015. And this is how they responded to Theresa May's announcement, identifying exactly the same problem, but not offering up any solutions, except encouraging people to see it as a great national pie. Pie? That's gone back to my pasty line. A great national effort.
Yeah, no, yeah.
Or pie. PM vows all-out drive to tackle the housing crisis, saying developers must be stopped from sitting on land as she unveils plans to create 5 new garden towns. Hang on.
But she can't stop them, James.
Well,
unless she doesn't
grows over his plans to control
she needs
property
to stop
market.
them.
Developers must be stopped.
She needs to stop them, but she hasn't done anything to say she's going to stop them.
Happy days. Where are the 5 new garden towns?
Is that a quiz question?
Yeah.
I don't know.
What about, finally, on this pasty, give you a last one.
Oh, no, not
What do you think it is? He founded the Pure Pasty Company in 2010, an American newcomer has taken... No, I can't. This is all about building up tension so that people keep listening during the break, and then when I come back after the break,
it's a news in brief bit you've got
pineapple. There. Oh, God. I'm rubbish at this.
Well, I've ruined it.
Pineapple in a pasty, a Hawaiian.
With ham as well. Mushroom?
Smoked chicken. Red pepper. Courgette.